Unemployment has hit a record high of 34.4%, or in terms of people, 7.8 million in the country are jobless. Stats SA released the quarterly labour force survey for the second quarter on Tuesday. This is the highest unemployment rate recorded since the survey started in 2008. In its presentation, Stats SA highlighted that the Eastern Cape recorded the highest unemployment rate in the country. The official unemployment rate for the province is 47.1%, while the expanded unemployment rate is at 53%. Well, let's crunch the numbers, and for this I'm joined by Labour analyst Tony Heaney via video line from Cape Town. Tony, good afternoon. The President has talked about a number of pandemics, GBV, the coronavirus. Is unemployment a pandemic in your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question, and good afternoon, Hugo. Yes, I'm really surprised that we don't see or hear from government when we hear the kind of unemployment statistics that we have heard for many years. The really important statistic is the so-called expanded definition of unemployment, and that's nearly 50%, which means nearly half the country are unemployed. Now, that's the worst in the world, and we've heard absolutely nothing from government on that number. So I have been for some time really surprised that government has not recognized the national disaster that is our exceedingly high unemployment rate.
Well, our focus for this conversation is the Eastern Cape. What has been the changes in those numbers in the last quarter, or certainly in the last 12 months?
Look, Hugo, all the numbers have gone up. There's a small increase in the finance area, but by and large, all the numbers have gone up. All the sectors have gone up in terms of heightened unemployment. And yes, of course, the pandemic has an impact. We can't ignore that. But, South Africa has been sitting with an unemployment rate north of 20% for nearly 25 years. And I really do think that government should be recognizing that this really is a national disaster. It's a crisis, and there needs to be intervention to stem the tide.
Well, let's talk about those interventions. What can government do?
Well, Hugo, there are probably a number of things that need to be done. I think, and here are a few, in my opinion. The first one is we could remove a lot of the red tape around employment law and employment regulation. So we have great employment law for the employed, but we don't have great employment law that promotes employment. Secondly, we could reduce the red tape when it comes to starting a business in South Africa. And BEE, as sensitive as that might be, is one area. BEE, in my opinion, discourages direct foreign investment.
How so?
Well, I think that when you're investing money from overseas, you want to have control and, more often than not, 100% shareholding in that business. And when you are being compelled to share that with locals, then you'd say to yourself very often, why should we when we can start a business elsewhere and have 100% shareholding and 100% control? I think there are other areas as well, Hugo. I think, for example, we could promote apprentice schools more vigorously. I think another example could be we could promote South Africa as a tech hub for Africa, to promote and kickstart a kind of Silicon Valley, South Africa scenario. And even if that means delaying taxes for a while, just to try and promote employment. I think we could also try harder to promote employment in areas which are highly labor intensive. And that's, there are challenges when it comes to that, but there are lots of things that could be done. And I think the dilemma is that we're hearing nothing from government. And we're finding that we're simply becoming, every quarter, remaining, if you like, the country in the world with the worst and highest unemployment rate.
Well, all of this is impacting young people massively. Now, the youth and black African population particularly are hit hardest. Now, walk us through how the average black South African, youth South African, and the average white South African are impacted by unemployment? Because obviously there's a huge disproportion there.
It's, again, a national disaster, Hugo. You know, our youth are matriculating, if they're lucky, and they're faced with a dire employment scenario where, as you've rightly mentioned, 3 out of 4 between the ages of, say, 17 and 25 are unemployed. It's a hopeless situation. And it's been growing and worsening over time. What it's doing is, it's, I would say, it's a number of things. It's you simply got a lot of young, economically active kids or young people sitting at home unemployed, feeling in a hopeless situation. You've got many leaving the country. You've got many graduating and qualifying, but not being able to find jobs in the areas in which they have qualified. So there is this widespread sense of hopelessness when it comes to young adults and employment.
Now, Tony, 7.8 million unemployed people cannot be good for any country, particularly for young people. Now, this is not really about unemployment, but let's talk about the impact of having that number of individuals unemployed. I mean, when we talk about GBV, we talk about crime. Can we draw a parallel to unemployment and some of these social ills that we are seeing?
Well, I'm not a social psychologist. It's a very interesting area. My focus is largely on the labor relations and the employment law fields. However, I think anecdotally, one ought not to be surprised if you have anybody, including young adults, who are unemployed, who are unable to sustain themselves and their families. Then I would think, from what I see, there has to be a relationship to some degree between that and social disharmony, social discord, social disequilibrium that could manifest itself in crime. It could manifest itself in public disorder, and it could manifest itself in mental illness. So I think there must be a number of very serious consequences that flow from the fact that we have such a high unemployment rate, and as you're asking, in particular when it comes to young adults.
Now, we've got just about a minute left, so I'm hoping that you can quickly respond to this. But you talked about apprenticeships, and I like the idea of entrepreneurship and how everybody advocates for entrepreneurship. Now, if we did have apprenticeships, do you feel in your mind that this would potentially allow young people to become entrepreneurs, but with a skill set?
I think absolutely. You know, if you turn the clock back to the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, now that's some time ago. But in those years, South Africa had massive apprentice schools, fitters and turners, electricians, welders, boilermakers, etc., etc. Now that they might seem to be old school vocations, but really, you know, there are toilets in every houses. There is electricity in many houses. There are factories that need to be maintained. And I think that's one of the many areas of intervention where there could be a qualification process, a greater growth in self-esteem, and the opportunity for more and more young people to earn decent salaries in areas which are needed and will be needed throughout the country for a long, long time to come.
Tony Heaney, appreciate your time this afternoon. Tony Heaney is a labor analyst role, and we were in conversation around unemployment numbers, particularly in the Eastern Cape, and he is convinced that apprenticeship would assist in breaking